Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. A quick question for you all. Do we have any lawyers listening to the podcast or representatives from legal teams and law firms? If we do, I have a quick question for you. Do those traditional moats around the legal services industry still exist? Are they still slow to embrace technology? Or is that just a myth? Are they wanting to change and do things differently and leverage technology that makes their life easier? Well, today I want to explore the world of legal tech. And in particularly, document automation, negotiation and analysis platforms. And this is not my area of expertise, so I've asked Giles Thompson from Avoca to join me on the podcast today. So buckle up and hold on tight, because wherever you're listening to this podcast in the world, it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to the UK so you can join me and Giles in conversation about legal tech, document automation and so much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Giles. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thank you very much, Neil. Yeah, so my name is Giles Thompson. I'm head of growth at a legal tech company, Avoca. What that means, essentially is I work across more or less everything aimed at driving revenue. So whether that's sales, marketing, PR, you name it, really. And what do we do as a business? Obviously, legal technology, but particularly contract lifecycle management and document automation as well. But I can go into a bit more detail about those in a bit.
Awesome. And you kind of got me curious right from the outset here. Avoca, is there a story behind the name?
There is actually, and we maintain there's sort of no right way to pronounce it. It's as in the French lawyer, or in a thick British accent, advocate.
Love it, man. But I'm interested to find out more about everything that you're doing there. But before we learn about the success of you and the company, I always like to find out more about my guests and how they got where they are today. So how did you get here? What's your origin story? Where did your passion for tech come from? What lit the spark? And how did those worlds of legal and technology collide for you?
Yeah, so I'm a farmer's son from rural Norfolk, and really, I didn't have any exposure to law or any exposure to technology unless you count agricultural machinery growing up. However, there's a real turning point for me, and it sounds a bit corny, probably was the iPhone in 2007. Just a complete paradigm shifting piece of technology, changed my perception about sort of what technology can and should do. So I, to be honest, have not got much aptitude for maths. So I knew I was never going to be a coder, but I wanted to get exposure to people who were, geniuses with technology and to sort of help, guide them in real world sort of use cases and help also articulate to people how their lives, whether that's working or personal lives, could change through the use of technology and ultimately be better. So I actually trained as a lawyer. And the reason I did that, in no small part, was to get exposure to lots and lots of different technologists. And I ended up working as a patent litigator, specifically on technology patents. But I did quite a bit sort of while I was training as well, things like cybersecurity law, copyright litigation, all this kind of thing, as well as quite a few commercial contracts for IP and IT, which gave me loads of exposure to people who were doing this stuff day in, day out. But then I got a bit frustrated and I decided that actually I wanted to be one of the people actually sort of doing it, my sort of immediate vision. And now I work in Avoca, where we're maybe 25, 30 people, something like that. And we're all making a huge difference with the work that we do every day with a piece of technology.
What a great story. And like, as you said, that path led you to Avoca. So for people that are hearing about it for the first time, can you just tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you now solve for your customers with your technology and possibly what makes you different from other solutions out there in the legal industry?
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little bit reductive here, Neil, so please excuse me. But, essentially, whether you are a professional, private practice lawyer, or whether you are just a regular professional who needs contracts in order to actually get stuff done in their job, the existing process, or I should say the traditional process for drafting contracts, is a complete pain in the behind. You have to take a template, delete square brackets en masse, customize which clauses go into the thing. It takes wildly inaccurate, it takes days. And look, if you're in some businesses, you're not even allowed to do that yourself. You have to wait on a lawyer who's doing far more of that kind of work than they actually have time for. And so what that equates to is deals not getting done and people getting frustrated, or deals just getting done slower. So effectively what our solution does is allows anybody, so a commercial person, a lawyer, to input certain details into an online web form, and it spits out a contract for them. So you might have seen other solutions in the market, things like sort of Rocket Lawyer, LegalZoom, which do this kind of thing. The USP that we have, I mean, there's two really, maybe three. Firstly, we deal with the most complex contracts going. That doesn't mean that the actual kind of user interface when you're inputting commercial information has to be any more complicated. Another USP we have is that you can actually set up contracts for drafting via a form yourself. So you don't need an expert to help you do that. There's no coding involved or anything like that. And also we offer a platform where people can actually collaborate on the documents in a way that's akin to something like a Google Documents. So everybody's marking it up together in real time. And you can actually negotiate on the platform and also draw loads of different insights as well.
And there is a bit of I don't know if it's a myth or not, maybe you can help me here, but the legal industry has had a reputation over the years for being slow to adapt to technological change. Is that still the case? And why have the old ways pervaded so long? Another industry that I immediately think of is like the medical industry and how slow they were to adapt. Is that still the case, or has things changed and moved on now?
I think the change has definitely been lumpy, Neil. We've seen certain firms basically see the writing on the wall and actually also just in general be very serious about the customer experience. And I use that phrase customer experience really deliberately, taking that shift from this is how things are done to actually this is how this could feel better for customers as opposed to clients. So we've seen that. I think the medical industry is a really useful sort of analogy. There's definitely some monopolies and the extent of the complexity of the work that's being done, meaning that actually the right technologists aren't sat in the right rooms and making the right recommendations couched in the right words to appeal to people. I think also incentives as well. Look, if you're a lawyer and you're working till 11 o'clock every night, and in order to get paid what you want to get paid, you have to bill a certain number of hours a day. And also getting trained on a piece of software is going to take you 5 days and take that out of the throes of general deal making that you're currently doing. I mean, unless you're extremely senior in that team, it would be quite hard for you to sort of break rank and take a step in that direction of innovation. So we try, and we're speaking to people, make that whole process easier. So I guess I'm saying that there are some people who've seen the light, but actually the lower the barriers to entry that we make in bringing technology to new people, i.e. making the setup really easy, making our support functionality really easy, allowing them to outsource certain elements of setup, the less hard it's going to be for people to say, hey, we should try this new initiative. So I'm trying to be empathetic as well, because I was there. And if somebody said to me, you need to take 10 days out of your billables and miss out on your bonus in order to implement this technology, I would not have reacted very kindly, I don't think.
And the speed of technological change is really ramping up across every industry. And the wake-up call for every business leader is actually it's never going to move this slow again. So as the legal tech industry increasingly embraces technology, do you think legal tech could actually go on to be the next fintech? Do you think that's possible?
I think it's already getting that way. Yeah, I actually think to me, it feels really obvious. I don't know whether other people just aren't in it in the same way. They can't see it in the same way. London is obviously a huge financial centre and will forever be a huge financial centre. It's also a huge legal centre. It's really, and this is a bit of a controversial thing to say, basically the international languages of trade when it comes to legals are New York law and English law. So it would make sense that startups would congregate here and be successful here. And the legal industry is a huge industry and does have huge parallels with the tech industry. So I think definitely, and I think a lot of the learnings and the good things about incubation of small startups in London that we already have, I've already seen them massively applied to legal. And actually the Lloyd's Syndicate just launched or are just launching a incubator for firms. And actually it's a really interesting incubator because it sort of crosses over between insurance, finance and law.
And if we look back at the history of the legal industry, there were so many pivotal moments of how technology transformed the industry forever. So I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you to look in your virtual crystal ball and say who or what will be the next DocuSign and deliver that next pivotal moment. Is there anything that springs to mind?
DocuSign's a really interesting one because I think a lot of sensible people have thought that e-signature was the way to go way before the pandemic. And then, I'm sure you were tracking the DocuSign stock through the pandemic. And so it took a pandemic for that to launch. I think where I'm struggling here is because I can either talk about something that's sort of super boring, or I can talk about something that's sort of ambitious. Now, I do think that AI-based review tools of contracts are going to break in the next maybe 5 years, because there's too many incentives for big commercial enterprises to do that, for them to ignore them. So when they get a contract from the other side, running a piece of software on which tells them which bits to negotiate, I think we're talking about 5 years for that kind of thing. Yeah. I'm not sure we've actually found out who the next sort of leader in that will be. And then I actually think that one of the things that might actually gain better traction is actually OCR software, so optical character recognition software. Because I actually think that one of the things that law firms are very aware of now is that they need to start making their records digital, and having all this physical storage space is a bit crazy. So I actually think that being a really good technology that's able to scan in physical documentation and digitalize it is probably the realistic one, although that's not very...
Love it. And I think traditionally law firms have been pretty much guarded, especially around new technology and bringing it into the business and doing things differently. So here in 2022, what would you say the moats are around the legal industry still?
Well, I think one which is, if I can call it sort of a leaky moat, or a moat that's got quite a lot of silt in it now, is actually the ownership of these businesses and the ownership structure. And it's the way that they work as corporations or not, as the case may be. We had some regulation come in, actually not that recently, but we're seeing it happen in the US as well, whereby legal service businesses can be run and owned by non-lawyers. That is a new thing in the UK, and that is not the case in large parts of the US and other really key jurisdictions. But that is changing in the US as we speak. So I think that's a huge moat, because actually where you're able to have multidisciplinarians running them as businesses, then I think things really massively change, because law firms can't afford to focus on process in the way that things have traditionally been done, because other people will be looking at more, product innovation and being customer centric, which will then, based on new client expectations, create new expectations of the way that those law firms do things. And then they're going to have to follow suit with people. I was actually speaking to someone at a UK law firm who used to actually work in manufacturing, and he used to design manufacturing processes, basically manufacturing lines and that kind of thing. And he said, we've basically taken that kind of methodology and applied it to actually how legal work gets done, and made it way more efficient and way more pleasurable for customers. So I think that moat is the biggest one, but it's getting eroded.
And I'm curious, as someone who's working right in the heart of the industry and who has the ear to the ground on the conversations that law firms are having, and also the trends that they're talking about, are there any particular areas of legal tech that are most exciting to you and your customers? And what are the signs that they're actually beginning to gain exponential traction? Is there anything that really stands out?
It's more of a use case than it is a technology, but I think it still applies and is still interesting. So I think a big one is actually law firms launching sort of tech portals for their clients. So we've seen this a few times now with our document automation platform, where people have taken a company's main precedent contracts, they then automated them for them, and then they've actually delivered them back via an online portal. And what that's meant is, instead of necessarily the lawyers at these companies going in and drafting the contracts for the first time, the commercial people have been able to go onto this online portal, fill in information, and be delivered back a contract. But one reason I think this is really exciting is not only is it cool that the commercial people can self-serve and just basically get on with their deals, it's really cool because it makes the law firm a bit more of an integral part of that business and a bit more well integrated. And you can, during the course of the subsequent negotiation and collaboration on that document, you can have the law firm commenting or only being added to documents where particularly risky commercial criteria have been invoked. So it just makes that process of instructing a law firm that much more sort of seamless. But actually, from a kind of customer side, they also want law firms that actually get their business. So having them, plugged into the business, as long as they can make the commercial relationship make more sense, means they're going to get better, more focused, and advice, I suppose.
And as for yourselves, what's your big focus this year? Is there anything you can share about what you're going to be concentrating on, and not only this year and beyond too? Are there any big trends you're going after, or what's really on your radar and keeping you awake at night at the moment?
Yeah, I think the first one is sort of obligation management. So, and adding that to our toolkit of our tool. So I'm going to sort of challenge you a little bit here. And I'm slightly stealing this from a LegalTech UK conference that I went to the other day, and also a little bit from sort of Henry Ford. But if you try and mechanize the horse, then you're going to end up with something that looks a little bit like a bicycle. That you're always limited in terms of the way that you think about it. If you define the ask as, we want a faster horse, whereas if you decide that we actually just want to get from A to B, then actually you can design a car. We're kind of trying to perceive contracts in the same way. So we're not worried that much about, obviously that there's lots of legal requirements that you have to have an enforceable contract, but we're not overly focusing on the traditional elements of contracts and the fact that we will need to have a bit of paper in a drawer somewhere. We're thinking actually contracts are just sets of obligations and expectations. And we need to record those obligations and expectations. And we need to be notified of them when we need to know what we need to do. And we also need to know when somebody else hasn't done what they're supposed to do. And actually, if we need to do something, we need to know that we need to do it ahead of time so we can actually go ahead and do it. So I know that's quite a mouthful there, but essentially finding ways to unlock the data contained within contracts and serving it back to our customers in a useful way, so that we're not just helping them get the contract done, we're actually the place that they go to figure out what their contractual obligations are, and frankly, to free up some headspace.
And I'm curious, from those legal teams that you're talking at, multiple different partners there, do they get it? Are they open to that change as well?
Yeah, and I think, so we're quite unusual in that we work for the likes of Booking.com, McDonald's, Warner Media, and then a number of very large international law firms like Allen & Overy and Baker McKenzie. So we very much see both sides of the fence. And what we're finding is law firms are very conscious that the way that the big international in-house legal teams are working is getting more, and they want to be part of that. And they find it quite exciting that there are more avenues for potential collaboration, albeit challenging to change your ways of working. Then the in-house legal teams, they are very overworked, very buried in contracts, and they also are forever being asked, hey, what are my obligations under this contract? And these are really smart, really overqualified people for doing that particular type of work, searching through and finding a provision. They want to be, frankly, at home with their friends, family, kids, getting out of the office at a reasonable time, but also doing work that is not of a menial nature as well, because they're well overqualified for doing it. So I think everybody's on the same hit the page. And a lot of these people, the corporate legal teams, they used to be in the private practice firms anyway. It's the same people with the same kind of scars from their training.
Love that, and love chatting with you today. And we've now come full circle. We started the podcast talking about your origin story. So I'm now going to ask you if there is a song, piece of music, book, or anything that has inspired and helped you in your career. Maybe you can share that choice and a story behind it, and we'll leave the listeners on an inspirational note. Is there anything you can share with us? And we'll add it to either our Spotify playlist or our Amazon wish list. What are you going for?
This is a really embarrassing one, Neil, but I was hoping it would make people laugh. I know it's a bit, I don't know. Dodgeball, an underdog story,
yes,
is my favourite film. It's the silliest, most stupid film ever. But actually, the plot line is a genuinely good underdog story, albeit very lighthearted. But obviously, there's the core message of keep going even when all looks like it's lost. But actually, the lesson it's not necessarily meaning to impart to me is actually, life might get tough at times, and building startups certainly isn't always easy, but it's a heck of a lot easier if you learn to laugh at yourself and to laugh at the situations that you find yourself in. So that's a movie I always get out if I just need a good chuckle as well.
Oh, great movie. And you've got Chuck Norris giving a thumbs up midway through, too. Right?
Yes, you know it too.
Well, before I let you go, could you just remind the listeners where they can find you online, contact your team, or got any questions at all? What's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, so there's avoka.com, and it's spelled a bit funnily. So it's avvoka.com, or you can email me, Giles, Giles, at avoka.com, just to get in touch that way. The other thing that we do as well is we run something called the Avoca Academy. So yeah, please feel free to give that a Google and to come along, because what we do is we run regular sessions where we talk people through the process of actually taking one of their documents and automating that, and then getting going with document automation and contract lifecycle management. So if you are a bit skeptical that you can get going with it in about half an hour, give us a chance to debunk that particular fear.
Well, I think we covered everything today, from you coming from a farmer's family to entering the world of legal tech, discussing legal tech being the next fintech, what will be the next DocuSign, and discussing why lawyers still have to negotiate contracts over email with track changes and several lawyers, and what the future will look like, and finishing on dodgeball. Man, we covered it all, but thank you so much for sharing everything with me today.
Thank you so much for the invite, Neil. It's been a true pleasure.
What a great guy. And for me, today's episode had it all. Yes, legal tech can be a dry subject, but Giles was able to bring it all to life with his personal story, his background, and solving real problems with technology, and even left us all with a smile on our faces talking about dodgeball. And as someone that's been in the podcast game for many years, let me tell you, that is quite a gift. So a big thank you to Giles for joining me on the podcast. But over to you. If we have any lawyers listening to the podcast, or reps from law firms and legal teams, what are your biggest challenges right now? What do you like about technological change? How's it making your life easier? And how is it creating more problems on the flip side of that? Whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you. And remember, there's always an invite for you to come on this podcast too. So whether it be leave a message, ask a question, or come and join me on the show, whatever it is, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So a big thank you to Giles for joining me on the podcast today and bringing the world of legal tech to life. And an even bigger thank you to each and every one of you listening in 165 countries. You are all that makes this podcast what it is, and the reason I record it every day. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.